this scourge on the United States and other countries. There are over 100 organizations that support this bipartisan legislation. I'd like unanimous consent to put the names of these 100 organizations into the congressional record.
Without objection.
That's the first step. Hold a person who buys this crime accountable for their conduct. But let's go back to the victims of the crime. The victims of the crime need help as well. In fact, that should be our first priority, rescuing those victims. I told you about how many shelters there are in the United States, or beds, less than 300 beds for minor sex trafficking victims exclusively. And we need places to take these young women primarily and help them regain some life, because life had been stolen from them. So how do we do that? I mentioned to you we spend $25 million a year on domestic sex trafficking victims, about $85 million a year. Foreign countries receive that. So we're introducing soon the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act. Once again, Carol Maloney from New York, bipartisan, is helping be the co-sponsor in the House. I mention bipartisan for a lot of reasons. This is a bipartisan issue, but you know, Carol Maloney, she and I don't see a lot alike on a lot of issues. I mean, we disagree on a lot of things. We don't even speak the same language. I mean, she's from New York, I'm from Texas. We need an interpreter even when we talk to each other. But on this issue, it is an American issue. And I appreciate the work that she's done, and others on both sides, on focusing in on trying to solve this problem. And once again, John Cornyn in the Senate is leading the efforts over there. And so what we're going to do on this piece of legislation is try to fix current law, law that was first originated, I think, by Chris Smith from New Jersey years ago. And let me explain to you the problem with this. When a victim from another country is trafficked into the United States, and let's use a girl, a young girl, because she is from a foreign country and she is trafficked internationally into the United States, and if she's rescued, she is able to receive certain services from the Health and Human Services. She can be certified as a human trafficking victim. Once she receives that certification that she is actually a trafficking victim, there are certain services available to her, but only to international victims. So this law will say, look, we're going to treat international victims, yes, help them, but if it's a domestic victim, they're going to be able to receive those same services, and shelters will be able to receive those same services as an international trafficked victim. So once they can obtain certification that they are a trafficked victim, then they can apply and receive those same services as well. But also, we want to be able to have funding for these shelters that we need throughout the country. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to talk to you about raising taxes. You know, that's not the issue, or even taxpayer money. So how are we going to come up with some money for grants for these nonprofits throughout the country that are really doing as good a job as they can but are short on money? Well, let's go back to the courthouse. We got people that are coming down to the courthouse who are being convicted of being involved in human trafficking. We get the customers involved in punishment as well as the trafficker. This legislation would require that these criminals pay rent on the courthouse. They'll pay for the crime that they have committed, the system they have created. Not just with going off to the penitentiary, the Do Right Hotel, but they're going to pay into a fund. $5,000 will go into a fund. And this fund then will be money that will be open for grants, going through the grant process of the federal government for non-profit organizations and other organizations, other government entities to receive for funding to help the victims. So the money is needed. We're spending $25 million. Let's get some more. Let's punish those criminals, make them pay for it, go to prison, hold them accountable, pay the fine. And, of course, the fine would come after restitution. There would be restitution to the victim. Federal judges know how to do all of those things. And then the money would go into the fund that would go to trafficked victims. Similar to the VOCA fund concept that was used or began several years ago, where criminals generally in federal court pay into a crime victims compensation fund. That money then goes to crime victims. But this would be a special fund that those people convicted of those dastardly crimes would be required to pay into. So that's the basis of the bill, and let's try to get a grip on that this issue, hold people accountable, hold the trafficker accountable, hold the person that's the customer accountable, and then rescue the victim and treat her with the dignity that she deserves as a human being and get them out of that slavery that they have been trapped into. So we'll soon introduce that legislation in the House and in the Senate. Mr. Speaker, this conduct that I have talked about, I would hope would concern Americans. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time at the courthouse in Houston, first as a prosecutor, 22 years as a criminal court judge. Saw a lot of victims of crime, a lot of children. A lot of those cases, many of those cases, were crimes that were sexual assault. Sexual assault cases are a unique type of case, Mr. Speaker. Sexual assault cases against minors has a dramatic impact on the minor. Sexual assault against minors that have been trafficked into slavery, I don't know of anything worse because of the repetition of the crime that is committed against that child. And these traffickers, when they commit these crimes, these assaults on young women primarily, boys as well, or older, adults who are still forced into prostitution. That is a sexual assault. It is a crime. And when a person commits the crime of sexual assault against another, it's more than a physical crime. It is a crime where the perpetrator tries to steal the soul, the very life, the very heart of the victim. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, they are successful. That is why sexual assault is such a horrific crime, because it goes after the inner being of the victim. And that's why it ought to bother us that occurs. It ought to bother us that what's taking place other parts of the world, whether it's in Europe, Central South America, and in the United States against children. It ought to make us mad so that we can do something about it and hold people accountable. Congressman Jim Costa and myself, Democrat from California, and I started the Victims' Rights Caucus several years ago, 2005, bipartisan, to try to help victims of crime. We have a lot of members on it, almost 100. And we are focusing on this issue of minor sex trafficked victims in the United States and in other countries to try to get them rescued, to take them to shelters like Mario runs in Central America, the same type. When Ms. Hahn and I were there at this shelter talking to these girls, they were happy to see us, really happy to see Ms. Hahn. She just has that personality. I'm kind of a grumpy old guy from Texas. But they were pleased that somebody actually cared about them. And they made us things. I have a bracelet that a young girl made for me. Miss Hahn has one too. They tied it on our wrist. I get a lot of things. I have 10 grandkids. They make me things. I wear this bracelet for a lot of reasons. One, because a child gave it to me that had just horrible things happen to her in her life. It is important for us, with all of the issues we've got to deal with here in Congress in the United States, that we get back to some basics about how other people in this country are treated. And when they're not treated right, we need to be upset about it. And in this case, we need to hold people accountable for doing things to kids. And we can do that. We can make things better. Treat victims like they're victims. Hold criminals accountable. Stop the demand for minor sex trafficking by putting those folks in jail, making them pay into a fund that goes to grants that will end up in the hands of shelters that try to help these kids, and some other things. Awareness is very important. It's been said by a lot of people over the years that when we're judged, either as a nation, Congress, country, we're not judged by the way we treat important folks. We're not going to be judged by the way we treat the rich, the famous, the powerful. We're going to be judged by the way we treat the poor, the unfortunate, the elderly, children, and victims of human suffering. I hope we are judged well. I hope we see the American conscience raised to a level that this is important. Children are important in this country, and those that have had bad things happen to them, we're going to be concerned about it and not just walk over, as the good book says, on the other side of the road and pass them by. And that's just the way it is. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the nation's capital, the District of Columbia, was in great grief and pain as we lost 12 employees at the Washington Navy Yard. I want to thank members who have expressed their condolences when they've seen me here. Monday I was on this floor. Monday was the day of the shooting. Tuesday I was on this floor for a moment of silence for members of Congress who had served in the Navy, even though this is really a naval installation which houses largely federal employees of the Naval Sea Systems Command. Sunday, I was at a memorial service for the 12 with the President and other members of Congress and a large group of friends and families of the 12. Yesterday I attended the funeral of Arthur Lee Daniels, a most sobering and sad funeral, a man who supported his wife and children and was much beloved by them. He was the breadwinner. Now he is gone. All during that week, Mr. Speaker, there was a cloud hanging over this city that I could not forget. That, strange as it may seem, the shutdown threat of facing the federal government was also facing the District of Columbia. Although we're talking about a local budget, and a budget that by rights should not be in the Congress at all, September 30th is the end of the fiscal year. That is Monday, 4 days away. The prospect of a government shutdown increases as each day passes. All that we hear here is permutations on the conditions that have now been put on the congressional resolution for keeping the government open. So I cannot assume that there will not be a shutdown, at least for a short period of time. Considering the shutdown of 1995, anyone who reads history or who was here, I think, would not want that to happen. The cost of a shutdown to the nation's capital, according to figures from 2011, when there was, and I should say, the cost of a shutdown threat, because the government did not shut down. In recent times, there were 3 possible shutdowns in 2011. But the cost of a shutdown was $131,000 to the District of Columbia and 3,000 staff hours. That's money and time that should be spent on running a big city. So I'm sure members must be saying, well, what is it that the District of Columbia did to make the Congress want its budget to come to the Congress? Because that's anathema to most members of Congress. I think most members of Congress would almost rather repeat the revolution of our forefathers rather than see their local budget here before members who know nothing of it and have nothing to do with it and don't have a dime in it. This is a matter of history and anachronism that nobody should be proud of. We're talking about a local budget of $8 billion in local money, and there's not anything about the D.C. budget that has summoned it to the Congress. It comes because it has always come. It's on automatic pilot, despite a budget autonomy referendum that has been overwhelmingly passed in the city, despite my budget autonomy bill, despite my statehood bill. But we're only talking about the local budget now, about local budget autonomy. So, my friends, I can say there's nothing about the D.C. budget that causes it to be here. On the contrary, the District of Columbia has a $1.5 billion reserve. It puts money in its reserves every year, in good times and bad times. That is one of the largest reserves in the United States today. Most jurisdictions would be proud to have any reserve at all. So far from there being something about the budget, there ought to be a resolution on this floor commending the District of Columbia for how it has handled its local budget. Its budget was submitted here on time. The budget was in such good shape that it was easily approved by both houses of Congress. There it sits in the House and the Senate along with federal appropriations, although the district budget alone is not a federal appropriation. It is a local D.C. budget. So in this matter that ties the city up in the Congress, there is no budget issue. Indeed, the appropriators have never interfered or try to change the local budget. There's no way they could do so. A local budget is put together with great delicacy after subcommittee hearings and negotiations between the council and the mayor and trimmings here and additions there. No one would dare touch it. And in my more than 20 years in Congress, and most of my time has been spent in the minority for me, no one on either side of the aisle has attempted to get into the innards of the district budget. And I have every confidence in the district budget because the District of Columbia has something that no other jurisdiction in the United States has. It has an independent chief financial officer who serves on a 5-year term, cannot be fired by the mayor or city council except for cause. And you know what cause means. He's independent. You can't spend money unless he passes off on it. The money is available. And unless he thinks it's prudent, of course, there's the same kind of discretion that your own local jurisdictions have to spend money. But it's not nearly the kind of discretion you're used to. Most political figures, indeed no political figure, no mayor or council or local legislature has a chief financial officer that gets the final say on budgetary matters. So you see, there's nothing that any member could raise about the budget, since if anything, the district budget is subject to a kind of scrutiny that no member's budget is. There are members in this body whose budget is balanced only by straws and fluff. This is a balanced budget that has had the sanction not only of the mayor and the city council, but a chief financial officer. So you say there must be some good motive here. Who, after all, who would want to bring a big, complicated city to its knees for nothing? The answer, my friends, is no one. There is no one in this body or in the other body that has called for or made a statement that would lead you to believe that she is for the present predicament of the District of Columbia, allowing the city to close down if the federal government shuts down. Nor is this one of the usual ideological or philosophical differences between the two sides, where Democrats and Republicans have deep differences on matters like their budget or health care, the rest. Not this one. No one complains about the budget and how it is put together. No ideological or philosophical differences have been raised. And if there were some, I think there would have been no hesitation in raising them. So there's nothing in this for any member of this House. There's nothing in a threat of a shutdown for any member of the House. There's nothing in a shutdown itself. And here I'm referring to a local government shutdown. Part of the reason it goes on is because most members don't pay attention to any local jurisdiction, even one right in their face, the nation's capital. That's not what they've been sent here to do. Most don't even know about it. I'm sure they don't care about it. And so this historic anomaly doing great damage to the city continues. Worse, this violates this matter with our local budget here, now facing the great nation's capital with a shutdown, violates every principle of federalism, my colleagues on the other side stand on federalism. It would appear above all other matters, and I should think they would be the first to want the local budget out of the hands of the Bigfoot federal government. On my side of the aisle, there are deep feelings about local control as well. Put yourself in my position. How would any member of this House feel or react if its local money had to pass any eyes in this chamber who had nothing to do with raising that local money? I don't have the words to say what you would say in that circumstance. For if this government was founded on any principle, it was founded on the principle of federalism. And if there is any meaning to federalism, it begins with money. No taxation without representation. You, member of the House and Senate elected by your constituents, don't get to say what my constituents do with their own money. That's a basic principle of American federalism. The gentlelady from Texas.
I was in my office, Congresswoman, and I could not help but both agree and hear you. Wanted to come just to applaud you for, first of all, restoring and educating this House on the issues of federalism, local control, and also reintroducing them to Washington, D.C., that gained local control and gained the right to elect its local officials, and also, maybe most people don't know, has an operational budget that is balanced and in actuality could continue to run its services for its people, as Congresswoman has indicated, but for the pass-through that is required here in the House of Representatives. So I simply wanted to come and applaud you and say a government shutdown is for naught. It is not good for anyone. And it is shameful that it is tied to the defunding of Obamacare when the millions of Washingtonians who are here, who dutifully provide for this House and this Senate and all of those who come in and out of Washington, D.C., the millions of tourists, the international guests, and that we would dare tell them without a vote, without a voice in terms of the voting voice, to say, not only are we shutting down the government that is going to hurt all of America, we're going to shut you down, and you're in local control with your own monies, ready to run, ready to help, ready to provide the safety and security and the comings and goings of those who work in the federal government, the House of Representatives. So I could not miss the opportunity to, again, reinforce my commitment to the legitimacy of Washington, its right to a voting representative in both the House and the Senate, and as well the fact that you make a very potent argument, because in many of our jurisdictions, city government may still be operating. Of course, many people will be hurt by Social Security, Medicare, veterans, the soldiers' families who don't get a paycheck. But what the Congresswoman is saying, and I want to add that, insult to injury, coming from this shutdown, is the fact that a whole city would not be able to operate, the nation's capital, where people are now heading to by airplane for whatever visits they may have, tourists, international guests. I just met with an international leader today. All will be coming to a city that will literally be shut down because my Republican friends want to defund Obamacare and don't have the respect to give you the waiver and the position that you've asked for to make sure that Washington, D.C. runs. And I thank you for alarming us. And I hope that as we enter into our discussions tomorrow, that we will raise this issue and that those of good sense, common sense, will come to their senses, not only for the people of the District of Columbia and hearing your plea, but they'll come to their senses for the American people and keep this government running.
I thank the gentlelady from Texas who, in her generosity, has come down to speak from the point of view of another member who isn't facing this in our own jurisdiction, but understands from what we're facing here for the federal government how it must indeed be, and I thank you very much for your generosity and for those very insightful statements about our predicament. Indeed, I had before I recognized the gentlelady, I was speaking about federalism. Essentially, our forefathers and mothers distrusted federal power, and nothing is more alien to federal power than a local budget. I can't imagine that they would have abided that under any circumstances for the District of Columbia or any other city. For this is in many ways, this country is in many ways state and local oriented, not federal oriented. We need the federal government. We can't do without it. But as to our principles, we set up a republic that separated local and state matters from federal matters, and of those matters, none is more salient than matters affecting the purse. Now, the district does not regard itself as a hostage. We are not a hostage to this fight. If that were the case, we'd try to negotiate our way out of it or give up. But we're not a part of this fight. When you're a hostage, somebody can say something about you, or they want something and they are using you to get it. But they're not. No one has claimed the District of Columbia as some link to the disputes that are going on here between the administration and Congress. So we face a no exit, no way out proposition, because there's nothing we could ourselves do. There's nothing for us to give. There's no concession for us to make that would free us. We've got to depend upon the goodwill of the Speaker of the House, of the Majority Leader of the House, of the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the Minority Leader of the Senate, of their leadership, this leadership, and, of course, of our own minority leadership and the members of the House and Senate. I cannot believe they do not identify with me as I stand here trying to get recognition for my local city to spend its own money. I believe if they put themselves in my place, there would be enough generosity in this body to agree that wherever we stand on the dispute before us, the District of Columbia is not a part of it and should not be dragged into it. This is a big, complicated city. It's run well. Its budget and reserves shows that. The federal government, unlike the nation's capital, does not deliver direct services. That's what big cities and small towns do. The federal shutdown will have its effects throughout the country because we've got almost 3 million federal workers, and they will feel it first and foremost. And some of the services that the American people regard as essential, but which are not considered essential by the Office of Personnel and Management, some of those services will not be available. But those are not like the services that many of you who live in the District of Columbia, members of Congress, depend upon from the District of Columbia, like picking up your trash and garbage, for example. Even that would be stopped. Who would be affected, therefore? Well, clearly the 600,000 plus. Actually, it's close to 625,000 now because the district has been gaining population at a rate of about 1,000 per month. That's how well the city is doing. That's how attractive the city is to people moving to this area. So clearly, first and foremost, its own citizens. But the District of Columbia is the nation's capital and serves private businesses. It serves federal officials and federal buildings and foreign embassies. The scale of the circle is very broad of those who will feel any shutdown of the District of Columbia. Moreover, our finances, which have been doing so well, could be very negatively affected. The city has financing agreements of various kinds, a master equipment lease, for example, because like every city, it leases a wide variety of equipment, like even traffic lights and automobiles and public safety vehicles, and it has certificates of participation on some of its buildings, like its command center for public safety. All of those could face a default if a payment is due while a shutdown occurs. And of course, if that occurs, if they miss a payment, then of course under the terms of these agreements, the bondholders must be notified, and that would drive up borrowing costs. Can there be a member that even knows this? Surely there are members who would care that this unintended effect would lead to such serious results. Wall Street already penalizes the district because its budget has to come here at all. When your budget is not final, when it is passed by your local officials, it has to come to a body like the Congress of the United States, even at its most stable. The factor of dual sanction to a budget costs the city on Wall Street, notwithstanding its handsome reserves. Now, I'm not asking the Congress to do the unprecedented. 18 years ago, when the government shut down, and it was shut down for a week, I went to Speaker Gingrich and asked him not to allow the district to shut down again. There were partial shutdowns. Each time a CR came, he included the district in the CR, and I have asked for that relief as well from the House. The House and the Senate and the it was a House and Senate in Republican hands and administration in Democratic hands, also a polarized time, and yet the District of Columbia was kept open. There are remedies. We are in the congressional resolution because thanks to the appropriators for the last 10 years, if there is a congressional resolution, or for that matter a bill, the District of Columbia can spend its money at next year's levels. That's not a big favor to the District of Columbia because we are, remember, not a federal agency who can only spend at the present year levels, but it was an important thing to do because it had calamitous effects when the district could not move ahead with its own appropriations as planned, and with contracts, and with schools, and with the many different operations it affected when you couldn't spend at the next year's level, which you had approved and had been approved by your chief financial officer. So I've had 3 bills. One, to amend the CR so that if it turns out to be December the 15th, or if it turns out to be a week from now, whatever it is, the district would not have to lurch from CR to CR in short-term CRs. So we've asked, the amendment said the district can spend its funds for the 2014 fiscal year. Then I have an independent bill that would allow that same remedy. not part of the CR, that the leadership could bring to the floor simply to allow the district to spend for the fiscal year, same terms, nothing changed, except it could be that's now on the appropriation that's pending, except that we could go for the next fiscal year. And then I have a permanent no shutdown bill. What makes all of this so ironic is that pending as I speak is bicameral, bipartisan support for preventing government shutdowns. This summer, the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and the Senate Appropriation Committee approved larger bills that would permanently authorize the district government to remain open and spend its local funds. The President's fiscal year 2013 budget contains the same authorization. And the appropriators in the House have acknowledged the harm done to the district by these shutdowns and simply asked the authorizers to proceed. As we move closer to the government shutdown, the need to free the district's budget from the grasp of a dispute that shows no sign of ending has become more clear. These continuing resolutions, the preparations, are having a punitive effect on the nation's capital. And the nation's capital is an innocent party to this federal dispute. Only legislation like the three bills I have just named, or my budget or autonomy legislation, would keep the nation's capital from being embroiled in federal fights. I ask members to consider what I have said here this evening and to free us from disputes I don't think you mean us to be a part of. And I thank, I yield back. I thank you and yield back
the gentleman,
balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
H.R. 527, an act to amend the Helium Act to complete the privatization of the Federal Helium Reserve in a competitive market fashion to ensure stability in the helium markets while protecting the interests of American taxpayers and for other purposes.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Been some interesting news come out. The Council on American Islamic Relations is changing its name. There's an article in the American Thinker, September 23rd. This article points out that an explosive story posted Sunday by Charles Johnson at the Daily Caller reveals that CARE has apparently been laundering money obtained from Middle East donors in violation of federal law. While it publicly presents itself as a single organization, CARE has in fact created a multitude of 501c3 organizations and 501c4 and a 501c4 CARE Action Network. By moving donations around, CARE may have evaded taxes and has avoided disclosure of its foreign funding sources required by the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Quoting Johnson, quote, "Under IRS regulations, an organization may have a 501c3 and 501c4 related entities, but they must maintain a wall between the two. This is accomplished by establishing separate bank accounts, boards of directors, bookkeeping, and payroll. CARE, though, has done none of these," unquote. Johnson cites David Riboy, Vice President for Strategic Communications at Frank Gaffney Center for Security Policy, quote, "Plentiful legal evidence acquired in the course of a lawsuit, plus CARE's own official filing documents to the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs make clear that CARE has engaged in a thinly disguised money laundering operation. In addition to violating 501c3 regulations, CARE's undisclosed and hidden foreign donations amount to a violation of the Foreign Agent Registration Act as well," unquote. GuideStar reveals 9 state chapters, a property holding company in California, a main office in Washington, D.C., and the CARE Foundation. Many of these chapters have little income. The Iowa chapter, yes, there is one, has none. The foundation was delisted in 2011 because it failed to file the requisite IRS Form 990 tax returns for the 3 prior years. However, in June, WND reported that while Tea Party organizations were being sandbagged by IRS, the agency quietly restored the CARE Foundation's nonprofit status following a meeting with White House officials. Well, the article, though, points out that CARE is changing its name. And it should also be noted that this comes on the heels of an Inspector General report last week. It was made public that established that the FBI had not properly followed its own directives that had told FBI offices that they were not to have relations, non-investigative relations with CARE as part of their so-called community outreach program because of the evidence that was introduced in the Holy Land Foundation trial in 2007, 2008. And it should be noted that the U.S. District Court in the Holy Land Foundation trial, in which there were over 100 counts of funding terrorism, basically, that were found to have been violated, criminal violations. And the judge in the U.S. District Court found that when CARE ISNA moved to have their names struck, there was one other name, I believe, they had been listed as unindicted co-conspirators, and they wanted to have their names removed. And the court there at the district court refused to remove their names, so they appealed to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The U.S. Fifth Circuit Court group of judges ruled that there was plenty of evidence to support CARE ISNA, their names being part of the suit, because the evidence was sufficient to show they were the largest Muslim Brotherhood front organizations in America. So it is interesting when the article points out that they got their IRS status, nonprofit status, returned after they had visited with White House officials, which reminds me back 2 years ago. There was a law enforcement seminar at Langley, at the CIA headquarters, and CARE, though at the time the FBI was not supposed to have any relationship with them, the White House certainly had plenty of relationship with them, and they made calls to the administration, and they got the seminars eliminated out at Langley because they objected to people being taught about what radical Islam believed, what it wanted to accomplish, and they actually got people delisted from being able to teach, one of whom, Steve Coughlin, used to brief, has spent many years studying radical Islam, and he had used to brief the joint, our military commanders, and was located at the Pentagon, studied radical Islam. And then all of a sudden, because CARE makes a phone call or two to the administration, now a man that knows tremendous amount about radical Islam, no longer able to teach people about the dangers of radical Islam. That went well in line with CARE's complaints that the FBI training material needed to be purged because there were things in there that they found offensive. And so things were eliminated. Well, when Michelle Bachmann, Trent Franks, and I, a couple others, sent 5 separate letters to 5 different departments, Department of State, Homeland Security, Intelligence. One was the Department of Justice. And in each letter it set out specific facts indicating that there was at least some Muslim Brotherhood influence in that department. And so the inquiry was not requesting an indictment, just an investigation about the extent of Muslim Brotherhood influence in that particular department. Well, the Department of Justice response indicated they had an ongoing investigation at that time, and it was with regard to the impropriety of FBI offices dealing with CARE, despite the FBI new policy to the contrary, since there was evidence they were a large Muslim Brotherhood front organization. But nonetheless, some FBI offices continued to have their so-called outreach programs. One found that they had brought a couple of CARE officials in to help teach about Islam and Muslim activities. And the relationship went on. I'd asked the former FBI director why it took so long, since the FBI had been gathering that information about CARE's relationship to the Muslim Brotherhood, why it took so many years after they started gathering evidence about them to sever that partnership relationship for community outreach. So when there's no question there's Muslim Brotherhood influence in this administration, the Egyptians have pointed that out for a long time, and even under President Morsi in Egypt, it was published that they were so proud that there were 6, and they named the 6 Muslim brothers who were in high positions affecting the Obama administration. Well, since CARE, like ACORN had before it, when ACORN was found to have engaged in improper activities and they were captured on video engaging in highly inappropriate activities, and there was a move in Congress to sever any federal funds going to ACORN. Well, they just changed their name, established different organizations so they could still get federal funding. But now CARE, I don't know if they had seen what ACORN did so they could still get federal funding in different other agencies. CARE, according to this article, has changed their name to the WTF. WTF. Changed their names to WTF. So no longer will they be CAIR, CARE, for the Council on American Islamic Relations. Now they'll be WTF. CARE has now become WTF. Well, now when people want to have relations with CARE, they'll have to seek out WTF. The article also mentions the Justice Department Inspector General's report. This article says, yesterday, Justice Department Office of Inspector General released, then yanked, then released again, its report on the FBI's questionable interaction with CARE. Sorry again, WTF. The FBI had a strict policy in place limiting its interactions with the group following revelations of CARE's involvement with terror in the Holy Land Foundation trial, but those policies have not been followed. So, anyway, quite interesting there, and I see my friend from Minnesota has come into the House floor, but it is very important to note that CARE has been found by a district court and a federal appellate court to be a Muslim Brotherhood front organization, and now when you seek out CARE, you'll have to seek out WTF, the Washington Trust Foundation, or WTF, instead. But I'd like to yield to my friend from Minnesota.
You are talking about an extremely important subject because the Muslim Brotherhood has been on the rise across the world, and the Muslim Brotherhood, Mr. Speaker, as we know, is a terrorist organization. And so a terrorist organization has tried to manufacture a false front or a false facade for itself. They called themselves CARE, the Council on Arab-Islamic Relations. They set up shop here in America. They wanted to be the voice for the Muslim community in the United States, even though they are the voice for the violent Muslim Brotherhood terrorist group, which, by the way, was outlawed in Egypt for about 30 years under former President Mubarak. And then the Muslim Brotherhood came in. They became the party of record in Egypt. The former president of the Muslim Brotherhood became the president of Egypt until the people of Egypt decided to go into the streets in the largest human demonstration in history to take their country back because they didn't want the cruelties of this organization. It's bizarre to think that this organization, CARE, was having any relationship of any kind with the United States government, with the Obama administration, and with the FBI. When you think about our chief law enforcement organization, which we all have great respect for, it's incomprehensible that the FBI would be reaching out in a so-called engagement strategy and bring in this Muslim Brotherhood front group to advise the FBI on how to deal with Muslims. So here you have a terrorist organization that tries to put a new face on themselves, call themselves CARE, a terrorist organization, come into the United States, and our FBI is working with them and asking CARE to advise them on how to reach out and deal with the Muslim community. No wonder the FBI Director Mueller said, we're not going to have this anymore, and decided we wouldn't have that engagement. And it's disturbing to hear that there was continual engagement going on with this organization. And one thing that I've noticed with a lot of these organizations that have sometimes nefarious purposes, certainly CARE would be one of those groups. What is very interesting is that a lot of times these groups do change their name. They change it to protect the guilty because people are on to them. And that's exactly what's happened with CARE. People figured out who they are. Just like you said, Representative Goldman, Mr. Speaker, that the CARE organization was found to be part of this terrorist coalition and involved in terrorist financing in the Holy Land Foundation case. And so now that this word is getting out to the American people in a mainstream way, now they change their name to WTF. Well, it's kind of self-explanatory. WTF, that'll be the new acronym, but the American people are smart. It's just the same group. They changed their name to protect the guilty. Terrorist organization they were before, a front group they were today. It doesn't matter what their name is. WTF may be a very good name for this organization, maybe a very good name, but it doesn't change and alter who they are underneath. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And reclaiming my time.